y'all, my name is Cassie and I am the creator of Pieces of Scrap, and in today's video we're going to be doing something a little bit different than what you're used to. I picked up a card deck from Barnes & Noble in the crochet patterns section, and it is a granny square card deck, and actually I'm really excited because I've been really enjoying making these patterns, and there's actually a new card deck coming out this summer. So I will have to try that one out as well if this blanket comes together really nice. But there's this little flyer in here for the floral granny square card deck that's coming out in 2025, summer of 2025. So that's any minute now, really. But anyway, I've been working on this project for about a month now. I got this card deck from Barnes & Noble in April, actually, for my birthday, and I've just been working through it really slowly, and I'm probably, let's see, let me pull out the cards and see how many are left, because there's 50 total, and this is how big the stack is now. I'm going to count them really quickly and let you know how many I have left to make. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33 cards left in this stack. So I am a little less than halfway through it. So I still have more than half of the cards left to do. So that being said, I have over 20 squares to show you now that I've completed, and I came up with like a color palette that's pretty similar to the author's color palette. I matched it as much as I can so that it'll look kind of cohesive as a blanket. So in this little card deck you get a guide in here about how to read the diagrams, like stitches in the diagrams. And there's also a little point in here where it like shows joining the blanket, and you can join as you go, which is really cool. And it's just really awesome. As you can see in here, there's like instructions about like if you were to just, you know, create the squares and join them as you go. It would probably save you some time, so that's pretty cool. And there's also like different pages in here about like choosing a color palette so that everything like fits together nicely using the colors that you have. And yeah, it's all really exciting. And here's a photo of like what the finished blanket could look like. Obviously, we don't have to finish this, like do the same scheme. But the point of me making this and having all 50 squares is hopefully that once I create all 50 squares, I can join them all and create a big granny square blanket. And if you've been watching my videos for the past like month and a half or so, I've been like mentioning that this is in the works. Specifically, one of my videos, I talked about it in a Skillshare ad or a Craftsy ad, I can't remember which, but I'm really excited to finish this project. But let's go ahead and look at my color palette, and then I will share with you the squares that I've finished. Alright, so for my premier colors that I'm using a bunch of different brands just because that gives me better color options. But first off, we have this light tangerine color, which is the color Maze in Premier Parfait Chunky. I also have this sea glass green color, which I believe is called Seafoam. So we've got like this mint green. I also have this color, which I believe is called Eggplant. We've got, this is Rose, and obviously we need a white, and this is Parfait Chunky Neons in the pink shade, I believe. So we've got 6 colors in Premier Parfait Chunky, and then I got Big Twist is next. Alright, and then in Big Twist we have this color, and I'm pretty sure all of these are Posh. They're not Baby Bear, so Big Twist Posh. This is very similar to that mint color, but it's a little bit more on the blue side, like a sky blue. I can't remember what the color names are called for any of these colors because I don't use them as often as Premier Parfait Chunky, but I will put them all on screen for you as we go. So we've got the sky bluish color that's a little bit minty. I think it's like mint chip or something if I remember properly. I know that all of the Big Twist colors are kind of named after like sweets and foods and fruits and vegetables type things. This is Glow Warm in Big Twist. This is like our neon green color. And then we've got this one. Obviously can't remember this one at all. I think it's like some smoothie color, but it's a darker pink. And then we've got a slightly darker orange here. It doesn't have as much yellow hue in it. So this is another orange. We actually have 3 different oranges and like 3 different mint colors that I'm working with, but it's just hard to match these colors up exactly, but I was trying to get like different hues of orange and mint in this blanket. So we've got 4 Big Twist colors. And next up we have Baby Bee. This is a collection of yarns from Hobby Lobby. If you're not familiar, not a lot of people talk about Hobby Lobby yarns, but I've been really enjoying these. So we've got like this violet purple color. It's a little bit more, all 4 of these colors actually are a little bit more velvety looking than the rest of these. So we've got this purple. I've got a much darker orange than the other 2 oranges. We've got a true sky blue, and then we have this muted yellow color. It's not like vibrant or bright or anything like that. It's just kind of muted and subtle. So we got those 4 shades of Baby Bee. But anyway, that is my color scheme for the blanket. As you can see, we got some really cool rainbow colors, and a lot of them are really vibrant, but like I was saying, I was trying to mash them as much as I can to the colors in the card deck. So now that I've shown you all those colors, let's go ahead and look through the squares that I have completed so far. So first up is a very basic design. It is your classic granny square, and here is how mine turned out looking like. It's really cute, really simple, just those like double crochet clusters that you're used to seeing when you're seeing a granny square. Then number 2 is this single color, same design. You're just using one color to create the square. Number 3 is the solid stripe design, and here is how mine turned out. Number 4 is the same pattern as the solid stripe, except it's a solid color granny square. Then we go back to the basic design and we make a 2-color granny square, and it looks like this when it's done. And same deal with the second pattern that we were looking at, that solid striped pattern. Here is the solid 2-color, and here is how mine turned out. Then we have the half and half. This is pattern number 7, and here is how mine turned out. Pattern number 8 is quartered. So same deal, you're just switching up where your color changes are placed. So we've got 4 different colors on this square. And I think I remember in the kind of like instruction booklet within her card deck, there is like an option where you could make 4 of these, or like however many you want of these. You could even do a whole blanket if you want to, and do each one of these like a dime, like the same pattern, and then you can arrange them so that you have some diamonds arranged in the blanket. But at the same time, when I think about that, it's not really worth it unless you're doing like maybe like 4 of them total, because otherwise you could just make entire solid granny squares and it would do the same thing. The next one is number 9, half and half solid. Here is how mine turned out. And then number 10, which is the last of the really easy patterns at the beginning, is the quartered solid pattern, and it is very similar to that other quartered pattern. We're just working a little bit differently in the round. So my thoughts on the first 10 patterns here, these were all really, really easy to follow, really basic beginner level patterns. And obviously they're the same 2 types of granny square patterns with different types of like color changes, whether it's like half, a single round being a single color and the rest being the main color, or having quarters. Those were all different versions of the same thing, as well as like the basic striping pattern where every round is a different color. So that is the first 10, really easy, like I said. Now let's get into the next 10 patterns. I actually don't think I have the next 10. I have the next 7, so let's get my thoughts on these next 7, and then we'll go into some crocheting content for you. So pattern number 11 is a mitred or metered pattern, and it's worked from this corner out. So here is how mine came out. It's a little bit smaller than the rest of these squares, so obviously before I turn this entire project into a blanket, I'm probably gonna have to be doing some blocking to make sure all of them are the same size. And you'll see with not the next one or the next one after that, but the third next pattern is also significantly different in size than what we're used to seeing with the previous 10 that I showed you. And then for number 12, we have metered solid, and same deal, you're working from one corner to the opposite corner. This is how this one turned out. This is really cute. I actually really like this design a lot. Then we have stripe, which is really simple looking, but it's actually a little bit more complicated in action. So here is how mine turned out, and it's like a little bit more rectangular than the others, and I think it's just because of the border and just the overall nature of how you make this granny square is a little bit different. So this is another one that definitely needs some blocking. Then we have number 14, which is diagonal stripe, and this is the one that I was saying is definitely a lot bigger than the others. I'm not sure if I switched hook size or what happened, but here's how that one turned out. It's probably about 8 inch on either height and width on this one, bigger than the other squares, so that's really why we need to do some blocking to make sure this is the same size as the other squares. But overall, pretty similar to the last one you saw, except just diagonal striping instead of like vertical striping. Next up is a couple patterns that actually started becoming less of like the same thing over and over again, and like some new techniques to make different looking granny squares, or combining different types of techniques to make granny squares to make more unique looking squares. So this is the mixed pattern, and just like it sounds, you're using the clustered granny square technique with the double crochet in every stitch technique. So that is why you've got like some gaps in some rows, and then some rows you don't have gaps. And I really like how this one turned out a lot. It's really pretty, and I love the warmer yellow around the border instead of like this brighter yellow too. It like complements it more, I think. The next pattern is called block switch, and I feel like mine didn't come out looking like as pretty as the authors did, and I think it's just because worsted weight yarn just like looks a little bit better when color changing than chenille does. But from far away and just looking at it quickly, I don't think it's as offensive as I actually think it is. So here is mine. The main thing that bothers me about this one is just like where the yellow color switches to different colors. So it's just a little bit not as nice looking to me. And especially when you start the yellow rows, that stitch always looks like way bigger than the other little yellow stitches. But as you can see on the square itself, the card itself, you do have some obviously larger ones that must be like the beginning of the rows. So that one right there is probably the beginning of that row. And then let me see, this one down here is probably the beginning of that row as well. And the reason it looks like that is because you chain one and then single crochet in the same spot, so it looks a lot bigger than in other spots. And then pattern number 17, which is the last granny square I have to show you right now. It is called lace holes, and it's similar to that solid technique, except you're creating some gaps in areas where otherwise you wouldn't be making gaps. So it looks a little bit more lacy than the other ones, and in my opinion, it looks really pretty and nice. And also, I'm just like a huge fan of not ever having to color change ever. I know that it's nice to do in some circumstances, and doing it like at the end of each row is particularly nicer for me than having to do it mid-row like color changing. So that's why it felt nice to have like a break from having to color change on every single square that I made. So that is my 17 squares that I've finished so far. So I've got a lot left to make. I think I said 33 left to make, or something like that. That seems like it adds up. I think part of me isn't super enjoying some of these more complicated designs, specifically the ones where you have to color change mid-round or mid-row. That's not as appealing to me, just because then I have to stop and hide the tail while I'm working, or at least that's just how I would like to do it. Or if you work differently than I do, you'd probably have to go back at the very end and weave in all your ends. But I'm not just a huge fan of that. I just want to get it out of the way when it's appearing. So I'm not a huge fan of having to do color changes, but that's just a preference thing. But a lot of these squares are coming out really nicely, and I can't wait to make more squares that, let me grab one for example real quick. I really enjoyed making this square and similar squares like it where each row is its own individual color, and I think it's just because I don't have to do as much work to hide tails when I cut off my yarn or anything like that. So I'm looking forward to doing more of these patterns, and from what I remember when I was counting how many cards are left, there's a lot more like this coming in the card deck, so I'm excited for that. But anyway, let's get into some more crocheting. Don't chew. Hi, puppy. Hey y'all, so I have a Granny Square card deck update for you. The last that we spoke to each other, I had 17 squares done. As you can see, those are in the background here. And now I have completed the rest of the squares in the deck, and I'm going to show them to you one by one, and then after that we need to start blocking these so that they're all the same size to start joining together. So first up, let's go ahead and look at these squares. All right, so first up we have number 18, which is the pattern called Circle to Square, where you're starting as a circle and you slowly become a square. Obviously, it's just as it sounds. Here is how mine came out. A little bit different in the color selection here, but pretty similar. Overall, really easy to create this one, and I didn't really have any issues with it, which is awesome. Next up we have number 19, which is a granny circle to square, similar in technique as the last one, and it kind of reminds me of the first like 10 granny squares in this card deck. They were all like perfecting certain techniques, like going back and forth between clusters of double crochets and just double crochets in every stitch. So this one goes back to the clusters, whereas the last one I just showed you, number 17, was the double crochet in every stitch. So this is how this one looks like. I actually like this color selection a little bit more than number 17, but overall it's really cool. It kind of looks like a starburst. It's a really nice design, I think. The next pattern is number 20, and it is actually called Starburst, so it's kind of funny that I called that out for the last pattern. So this one is Starburst, and this is how mine turned out. I really like how gradually the color seems to like change in this one. We've got 3 different oranges here, and they're all just very slightly different. So we have kind of like an ombre gradient effect going on, which is really cool. And this one also kind of reminds me of the Tangled movie, all of those little sun decals that they had everywhere. That's kind of what this reminded me of, except instead of that like dark purple border around those, we have a dark pink border. So that's really cute and really simple. I even bet if you did like different colors for each row instead of having such similar colors, it would look really cool as well. Number 21 is Puff Circle to Square. So we have some puff stitches and gradually turn into a square design. This is how mine came out. It's definitely a lot thicker, and it's got like a lot more weight to it than the other granny squares, just because we're working with more yarn, obviously creating those puff stitches. And I also just kind of like that there's like lots of dimension to this one too. Number 22 is the Star Puff pattern, and mine came out looking very similar with that texture that I was talking about, the dimension. It's a little bit weightier. It's definitely less weight overall than that last square that I showed you, because overall there's more spaces in this one, but still a really cute design. Next up is pretty similar to that puff stitch one, except it's working with popcorn stitches. This is popcorn corners, and for some reason I really want to say kernels because that's just what comes out of my mouth. But this one has popcorn stitches leading to each corner of the square, and this is how mine came out. It seems like it might be a little bit smaller than the other squares that we're working with. I'm not entirely sure why, but some blocking will definitely fix that and help stretch it out a bit, I think. And we have number 24, which is Popcorn Center, which has those popcorn stitches obviously just in the center of the granny square. This one kind of reminds me of like, I don't know, Starburst, like the candy for some reason, like all of these really bright, vibrant colors. And I don't know, it just makes me think of candy. But as you can see, you turn it on the side, that popcorn stitch in the center like really sticks out a lot. So a lot more dimension on this one as well. Whereas like the center is the main focal point and the rest is just kind of flat in terms of texture and dimension here. We also have lots of holes in this one, and I think it kind of looks a little bit lacier than the others that we've been looking at in this section of the video. So that's also a cool little design feature here. Next up is number 25, the Popcorn Daisy. This is officially halfway through all of the squares we're working with. So here is mine. I actually love this color combination. I would be so happy to have a blanket just with this color swatch here with like white little daisies and the purple, yellow, and dark yellow just featured prominently throughout the blanket. Maybe like switch up which order you're doing them in, so you have some flowers with the purple center or the light yellow center, and just like switch up the orders so that it's not just all identical squares. I think that would make a really, really cute blanket. This square right here is probably one of my favorite patterns so far. Number 26 is the Popcorn Flower, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm not a huge fan of the star in the center and all of the gaps in that star as well. Like, those stitches just don't look really nice to me. This is how mine came out. It's a little more filled in the center, obviously, because we're working with a different yarn weight than the designer did. So that chenille texture and just the weight of that yarn definitely filled in a lot of those gaps. It's not as obvious that there's these big holes in the center. So I definitely like how mine came out more than it's pictured on the card. Next we have number 27, which is Granny Star Circle, which I am personally a fan of. I think it's a nice elevation to the granny square, just typically what you see. I think this one just looks a lot more interesting, a lot more intricate than the typical granny squares that we work with. So I am definitely a fan of this one. Number 28 is the Daisy, and this one's pretty basic. We've got a granny square with a flower in the center, and then it's just framed by multiple layers of squares. I really like the last row in this. It gives a little bit of a lacy texture that's also really pretty. I'm a huge fan of that, and the colors on this one are really pretty as well. I love the color combination. And yeah, I'm overall a fan of this one. This is probably also one of my favorite designs from the deck. Then we've got number 29, which is called Cluster Flower. And I will be honest, this one I kind of struggled with because I got in a habit of just like assuming that every row was like the same kind of short repeat of a couple stitches. But what happened was I was reading some of the stitches as single crochets instead of chains, but I very quickly after that learned that chains look very different from single crochets in the crochet diagram. So what ended up happening was I got to the row where you add these yellow stitches, and I ended up making all of the chain stitches actually single crochets and just single crocheting around the whole thing. And then I realized something was wrong because it didn't look like the picture on the card. And then I had to go back to that row and redo the entire row and then finish off. But overall, still cute design. One thing that I'm not a huge fan of is just like the starting stitches. You can really obviously tell where they are on rows like these because you have a chain and then that single crochet stitch, so it's bigger than the rest of the stitches around that round. Pattern number 30 is the Sunflower, and honestly to me this doesn't look like a sunflower, especially the colors that the designer chose, but it's a very intricate design, and this is where the difficulty level was definitely starting to ramp up. So here is how mine turned out. It's really like intricate looking. It looks like almost have you ever been to like a fair or a festival going on and they have one of those spinning tables and they're like squirting ink or paint onto it and it's creating a design that's like super symmetrical and just like effortlessly? That's what this reminds me of, is those designs, and as well as just like tie-dye designs as well. You can obviously tell, just like I was saying with that last design, that the starting stitches are like super obvious. I'm not a huge fan of that. So maybe if I were redoing these in the future, I would, instead of creating a chain and a single crochet and a single stitch, I would just skip the chain and just go straight into that single crochet, just so that we're not getting that large looking starting stitch and it's not as distracting. It might not be as distracting for some people, but definitely me, that's not something I'm a huge fan of. But I really like the lacy and intricate design on the rows of this one. It's really pretty. Number 31 is called In a Muddle, and we're combining like two different types of designs here that are separated diagonally, as you can see. So we have like the typical granny square design with the clusters, and then on the other side it's the double crochet in every stitch. So this is how that turned out looking like, and it's very interesting to look at. It definitely like tickles my brain in a weird way looking at this. Like it looks like it was done on accident almost. And I think the title really does it justice. It really is in a muddle. Like it's muddled and it looks kind of strange. It looks like something's like glitching, or like it's not rendering properly if you're familiar with like video terminology like I am. So yeah, this one is definitely a weird one in my opinion. Number 32 is called Little Lines, and this one is another one that took me several tries to get right, and I think it was just because I was not paying attention again, and it's mostly due to this is the first square we're working in back loops only, and I wasn't aware of that the first couple rows, and once I did become aware of it, I had to redo row after row after row and basically redo it like 4 separate times, each separate time realizing that another row was supposed to be completely in the back loops only. So here's how this one turned out looking like. I don't know why. It's probably because of just like how many times I had to make this over. I'm sure something is still wrong with it, but it just doesn't want to sit like completely like a square. It's kind of like bunched up in the center, like there's extra stitches somewhere or something. I don't know. I was not a huge fan of the square. It caused me a lot of issues, and it's mostly on my part because I wasn't following instructions and I wasn't paying attention closely enough, but then I also just don't like these colors together, I think is the other thing. So yeah, that's my main takeaway from this one. Number 33 is mini squares, and this one kind of takes us back to some of the techniques that we were practicing with those first 10 squares, and I felt like it was kind of out of place in order with these cards, but this is how mine turned out. I wasn't a fan of making this one because of just like hiding all of those loose tails for the color changes is just like the worst nightmare. I'm not used to doing that as somebody who works mostly in amigurumi most days. Amigurumi people, you know what I'm thinking. Like, you don't have to hide tails most of the time because you can just stuff them in and just forget that they're there. Just make sure they're secure on the inside. But when you're working with crochet, blankets, wearables, bags, things like that, you definitely have to hide your tails because you have to be able to not see them on the other side, and you can't just hide your messy work on the inside and tuck it away so nobody can see it. So that is why I was not a huge fan of making this one, but it is still a really cool design. Number 34 is Sun. And this one is kind of like a flower design as well, I think. It's really interesting. You could definitely make this look more like a sun if you chose, you know, like a yellow and like orangey colors for the center 2 or 3 rows there instead of picking like a purple. And I think that's why it comes across as flower to me. But this is how mine turned out. Definitely looking more flower on my part. I'm not sure if the gaps are just like more pronounced because I'm working with a different type of yarn than the author is, or if it's actually meant to be like that big of a gap, but definitely looking a bit different here. Number 35 is called Petals and Leaves, and this is a really pretty design in my opinion. It's pretty intricate, and it's the first time we're kind of working with creating multiple double crochets and then not finishing them off so that they become one single stitch. Like these corners here, they look like little leaves, and I'm just a huge fan of that. That's so pretty. Definitely would consider combining this with like other flowers to make some really pretty flower granny square blankets, and maybe instead of doing a white in the center, doing like orange or a warm yellow color, and having like these little yellow bits in the center maybe be just like a different shade of purple or something like that. It would be really, really pretty. But even with the colors as it is, it would be gorgeous as a full-size blanket. Number 36 is called the Dahlia. It's another flower looking design, and really after a while a lot of these become flowers just because of the nature of what these stitches look like. So this is how mine turned out. It definitely looks a lot warmer and more vibrant than the card does in my, actually, no, that's not true. They're pretty similar. There's just, obviously we have like that kind of gradient thing happening again because my oranges are so similar. But yeah, I just really like that a lot. That's really gorgeous. And again, we're seeing some more dimension, with these puff stitches, popcorn stitches, one of those two. And really they're just making some really pretty looking designs, and this would make a really warm blanket with a blanket full of granny squares with this kind of stitch in it. Number 37 is Flower Power, and obviously just more and more flowers here. So here's how this one turned out. This one was also utilizing a new technique that I hadn't seen in the other cards, and that was creating rows and rows and rows and then working back into previous rows that we hadn't worked, like specific stitches or spaces we hadn't worked into. And that's how we're getting these like dark purple stitches that come around like these light purple petals. So that was really cool. And again, it's just a really intricate design with those bits added. Number 38 is called Scallop Center, and I was actually a pretty big fan of this one. It's pretty simple, but it is really like fascinating to look at. I think like the jagged edges around all of these stitches here in this mint green row, it like kind of looks like feathers, and it's just really, really pretty to look at. We also have these hole details that go in the corner of each row, and I'm a huge fan of that. I'm not sure what I feel about like this little bit of pink poking through in these corners here. I think it would be better if you couldn't see that, but I don't know if there's much you could do to keep that from happening without adding more stitches in that chain space there. Number 39 is called Petals and Lace, and this is another really intricate looking one, especially in the chenille yarn. I'm not a huge fan of how this looks, especially looking at it on camera. It looks really messy, especially that yellow row. It just doesn't look very nice, and when I'm looking at it up close, it doesn't really make up for what I'm seeing on camera either. It just looks really messy. I don't know if it's because of those colors there where you can see like the orange row peeking through between these stitches, and I just need to like scoot those yellow stitches around or what it is, but I'm not a huge fan of this one. Pattern number 40 is called Diamond. This is really pretty on the card, and this color combination is actually really gorgeous, and it really shows through in real life as well. Look at how amazing this looks. Not a huge fan of like what these gaps look like in the center. I'm sure once this gets blocked, it'll look cleaner and not as messy looking, but overall it's really pretty, and I think it would make a really pretty like solid color block as well if you're just working with some solid colors throughout and maybe doing like a different colored border on each square. It would be really pretty. But as it sits now, it's not like making me feel really good about it looking at it on camera, but in person it looks a lot better. It just must be that it needs to get blocked, I think. Pattern number 41 is called Leaves, and it looks really simple on the card, but you're doing some really intricate designs here, and especially where you're placing the stitches is a lot different versus like other squares that we've made so far. So this is what that turns out looking like. Obviously we have like a lot more holes present. It looks a little bit lacier than we're used to, and it also, you get those like little leaf cluster looking stitches as well, and that's why it says Leaves, I think is what the pattern is called. So it's a very interesting design. Pattern number 42 is called African Flower. This is a gorgeous looking card at first glance, and it's really cool. This is another one we were working with back loop only stitches, as well as working into rounds that we had left gaps or stitches open before. And this is how mine turned out. It really does it justice. Looks a lot like the card. Doesn't disappoint at all, really. It's really pretty. The only thing that I'm immediately noticing is that these gaps in the center of each of these orange petals, it's not as obvious on this card And that's possibly just because it's laying on a flat surface and you're not able to see through it as much, especially with that flat surface just being like a white countertop or something like that. But that's definitely a little bit distracting to me, but it is still a very pretty design. Number 43 was called Popcorn, and obviously, just like the title says, this was a lot of popcorn stitches and it has a lot of texture to it. And this is how mine turned out looking. I think it'll look a lot better with the blocking, and it's also one of the smaller squares, and I think that's just because of how dense these stitches are. So hopefully it'll stretch out a little bit more and be a little bit closer in size to the other squares that we've made so far. Number 44 is called Diamond Scallops. So we've got this kind of diamond looking skewed flower shape, and it's a really interesting shape. I was actually a fan of everything but the center of this design. The center of this design, I think I'm just not a huge fan of. Maybe if it was the same color as this second row, I would be a little bit more inclined to like it, but just the same reason as the other squares that I'm not a huge fan of is just like seeing this bright pink color kind of poking through this bright green color is a little bit distracting to me, so it doesn't look like super pristine and perfect. Design number 45 is called Poppy, and this is another design that looks really beautiful on the card. So I imagine when this gets blocked, it's gonna look even more beautiful, but I'm a huge fan of this design. It's really pretty. We've got those really intricate looking petals again with the stitches that come down to the row that we had spaces unworked, and so we have that color coming in between the orange to make it look a little bit like more intricate, and in person you also see a lot of dimension when looking at it as well. Lots of 3D aspects to this design, and I also love all these gaps on the outside to make it look like a lace design and texture. Number 46 is 3D flower. It's obviously how it sounds. We have a 3D flower on here, so as I turn it, you can see this flower sticks out a lot more than the other flowers we've made, and the way that this is done is the flower, the pink flower part, is actually row number 2 and 3. And then you come back and you make the background behind that flower in row 4 and 5. And obviously you finish off the square with 2 rows of green as well. So it's a really cool design. I wasn't expecting anything like this with that 3D effect in it, but it's really awesome to look at, and it's really just overall really cool design, and it's really pretty. Number 47 brings us back to a pretty simple design, which is really strange coming down to the wire here in the final couple of cards. Here is that design. It's a lot more lacy looking than those previous 10 first granny squares where we're working with pretty simple designs. It really levels up this basic granny square design, I think, and gives you this like pretty like doily looking square instead of the basic like flat sides. Number 48 is called Wheel Spoke, and I'm a little worried about blocking this one and it getting like too stretched out, but here's how mine came out looking like. It seemed like as we're getting down to these last 10 designs, the gaps just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and less square-like and more looking like doilies, which was really interesting. But also I want to mention that this kind of looks like more like a sun, at least like a rudimentary drawing that you might see from a child, than that previous design that was titled Sun. So that is something I want to mention as well. Number 49 is called Floral Crown, and this is another one that kind of gets away from that square shape, and I was a little worried about it when I finished it as well. So here is how mine turned out. It's going to be interesting blocking this one, definitely, and making sure that it works with the other granny squares. I'm not sure how this one is going to be joined. If there's definitely going to have to be like some chains in place or something to connect these sides here with these like little triangle pieces sticking out like that. And then finally we have number 50. It is called Checkerboard, and I apologize for it's kind of bent up. I accidentally ran it over with my office chair. I didn't realize it was on the floor, but this is how mine which side is the front? This is the front. This is mine. And funny story about this one is that this number 50 card got shuffled in like probably halfway through making the square, so around like the 25 section this one sprung up, and surprisingly or not, this was not really surprising that it was in that area of the deck. So being that this is the last pattern and it seemed to be gradually going up in difficulty level, that was a little strange to me. This one was definitely more difficult to work with because you're crocheting over other rows, which at this point when I had been crocheting it, that had not been introduced to me through the deck. But it's still a really cool design, and it's definitely a lot thicker because you have stitches that cover other stitches, obviously. And it's also got a lot of weight to it, just like those squares that have a lot of puff stitches and stuff like that. And it's just because obviously you're using more yarn when you're working on top of rows that you've already made. So yeah, but my final thoughts about this one is just that I was surprised that this was the last design and it wasn't one of those intricate looking doily designs being the very, very last one, because this one was definitely not as difficult as other ones being the very last pattern. So now that we have finished all 50 granny squares, obviously I need to block them so that they're all the same size before we start joining them. But once we have them all blocked, which I think is going to take me 2 or 3 days based on the size of my blocking thing, and as many granny squares that I can do, I think I can probably do like maybe 1.5 stacks total on my little blocking board at a time. And I think it's at least going to take 24 hours for each stack of squares that I block at one time. So I'm hoping that I will be able to get through all of the blocking in 3 days, maybe 4 days now that I'm thinking about it, because we do have 3.5 stacks there. We will definitely see. I will keep you guys in the loop. But once we have all of them blocked, I will lay out the design, and you guys will obviously be there to watch that, to see how I kind of like position different blocks and how I mix and match the patterns to make it look pretty. And then after that, once we have an idea of how big the finished blanket is going to be once they are all joined, I'm going to go into my local Walmart and try to see if I can find some sort of fabric or existing like cheap blanket that I could just crochet these square, the border, the finished border onto the backs of these granny squares, because some of them just don't look really pretty on the back, and I think it's really needed that this one needs a backing. So that's definitely going to be a challenge. I know that I will probably be needing some extra tools to create like little holes in the edge of the fabric or the blanket that I end up getting for the backing, just so that I can crochet directly into it and I don't have to sew it on. So yeah, that is all we have to do right now, and I will check in with you guys later when I have an update.
So I just wanted to preface my blocking with the fact that I am probably not doing this correctly. I know that a lot of people, when they block their granny squares or they block anything, they wet down the work first, which is something that I am not doing here. I am simply just arranging the squares onto the blocking board and stretching them out as far as they can go so that they're all the same size. And I know that's not technically correct, and I know some of these squares are too wide for the block that I set, but we're just going to ignore that. I'm not super experienced with blocking, so don't be offended if you don't like how I'm blocking here. It was successful, and the squares came out looking a lot better than they did initially, so I'm happy with how they turned out. Blocking took 4 days for me, but for some reason I didn't record the last day when I removed or placed the blocks on the square. There were only 4 or 5 squares left to block on the 4th day, so I'm not sure if I just like forgot to film or if the file got corrupted, but I don't have it. It did take 4 days to block, but it was a lot of work. I'm glad they all came out looking good and everything is the right size and came together nicely.
Hey y'all, so today we are in my guest bedroom, which is a new room for you guys. I don't think you guys have seen this room since we flipped. This room used to be our office and we switched to the guest room is now our office and this is the guest room now. So they flip-flopped. But yeah, I don't think you guys have been in this room since we have changed them over. So this is a new environment for you guys, but my master bedroom, which is usually where I film like FPR videos, and the last video where I laid out the squares for my quilt that I was making, my sheets are actually getting washed today, so I can't lay it out on that bed. So we are sitting on a queen bed right now. Hopefully that is enough room to lay out all these squares. If not, we'll just have to scoot squares off the bed as we finish the design for like columns that I'm working on. So anyway, I have all of my squares blocked. We just have to lay them out like I was saying and make the blanket look pretty, and then I will put them into stacks for each column that I have finalized the design, and then I will know that that column all needs to be joined. The tops and the bottoms need to be joined, and then after I've joined all of the different columns that I make, I will join the different columns together so that it would just be one long join between each column, if that makes sense. But anyway, I think this blanket is going to be a 5x10 just because that is the only way I think I can make 50 squares work. So it will be a rectangle and not like a perfect square or anything like that. So let's go ahead and get started joining, or not joining, but arranging the squares.
Guys, so I thought I'd do a quick little tutorial slash walkthrough for you guys for how I am joining my squares. So first off, I'm folding the squares with the right side facing each other, so the wrong side is facing out on both sides, and I'm attaching my yarn, and this yarn isn't going to show through super obviously, but it's the same yarn I'm using for the border of my entire blanket. So once we've attached our yarn and we've tied a double knot on that yarn, I chain one, and then what I'm doing is I'm picking up the front loop of the square that's facing me and the back loop of the square that's facing away from me, and I'm just slip stitching through both of those loops, and this will make it so that the slip stitches are kind of hidden, and you'll just see this one little line in between the squares for each slip stitch you make if you were to stretch the seam apart. But overall, it kind of makes an invisible stitch, and you'll be able to see the edges really cleanly of both squares when the squares lay flat. Once I reach the end, I fasten off my yarn with a short tail, but long enough so that I can weave in the ends later. And then as you can see here, when you lay it flat, you can't see that seam at all, which is really cool. Here is a closer look at what I'm doing. As you can see, I pick up the front loop of the square facing me and the back loop of the square facing away from me so that I have two loops on my hook, and then I slip stitch through both of them. And it is a little bit of trial and error working with squares that are not identical. Some of these squares may have more stitches than others, so I was doing some improvisation to join the squares together so that they line up properly, and unfortunately this caused a little bit of bunching on some of the squares when the blanket was finished, but that was just because there were a significantly different number of stitches for some of the squares I was joining to others, so it caused just a tad bit of bunching when I was crocheting multiple stitches together to make up for that stitch difference. Here is one finished column. As you can see, I've joined the squares all on one side so that they all line up into one column. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish making the rest of the columns, and then after that we will crochet the columns together. So now I am joining two columns together, and instead of having to stop, obviously we're able to continue down the entire length of both columns. So it's the same procedure, just grabbing the front loop of the square facing you and the back loop of the square facing away from you, and slip stitching through both. Whenever I encountered a seam from the two squares of the column meeting, I would place a slip stitch into the seam because that added a stitch between the squares for me. And whenever there was a chain one space or something like that, I would also create a slip stitch into those spaces, and this allowed the slip stitches to be worked evenly across the entire span of the work. So I just recommend that when you're doing this, just make sure you're slip stitching as evenly as you can across your work. Don't add any extra slip stitches anywhere where it's not necessary, and just be mindful about where you're placing your slip stitches as well. If you're slip stitching into the side of a stitch, for example, on this square that you can see me working on screen right now, I was working into the side of double crochets, so there wasn't a front loop or back loop available on those. I just had to crochet through the double crochet itself. So when you're doing that, just be mindful that you're only grabbing one loop and you're not grabbing like multiple loops on that double crochet stitch or similar stitch, because then it might show through to the front and you won't have as invisible as the seam. Here is another spot where I had to do something a little bit different. So as you can see here, there's a gap in this granny square where the work dips down. So what I'm doing is I'm just putting slip stitches into the back loops of the square that's facing away from me, and then once I'm finding the top of that granny square, I'm sorry it's a little bit out of frame, but I'm just crocheting through that point at the top of the granny square, and then once I find the gap on the other side, there we go, I moved it a little, you can see better, I'm just making back loop only slip stitches until I meet where that square is available to me again, so that those gaps that we created in that granny square stay intact, and I'm not closing any of those gaps by joining them to other squares. You might notice as well here, if you're looking at where the front granny square is ending and where the back granny square is ending, the back granny square is a little bit bigger, so I'm gonna have to place some slip stitches in the same stitch on one side instead of the others. So here I've already slip stitched into this orange stitch right here, but I'm gonna slip stitch again through that, but into a different stitch on the other side, so that it kind of cinches in the work and makes it meet up a little bit more nicely. Otherwise the work isn't going to line up properly and it's not going to meet that corner at the same time as the square in the back. Here is another look at the work from the front. And as you can see here, you can see the slip stitches in the gaps of the granny square, so it will look a little bit differently. So here is the first two columns joined together, and some people might not love this invisible seam. Some people might want a little bit of a border around their granny squares, and to those people I would just suggest adding a single crochet, half double crochet, whatever size your border that you want it to be, to the granny square before you join them the way that I have. The reason I join my squares this way is so that I don't have to do any sewing, and it takes a lot less time than other methods do, and it gets a much flatter finish. For example, if you single crochet these squares together, you will have a little bit of ridge on the back of your granny square blanket, whereas this slip stitch method gives you a really flat finish as well. So now I'm creating the border around the blanket now that everything is attached, and the border that I'm creating is just double crochets into every single stitch, including the seams where we join the squares together. And in the corners I just put 2 3 double crochet clusters plus 3 chains in between those clusters. So 3 double crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet, and that is what the corners are, and that I did the whole way around. So I've got double crochets in every stitch and those corners.
Hey y'all, so I have the completed blanket done and here it is. It is so beautiful. I can't wait to put a backing on this. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do that in today's video because by the time I get the backing, I'm not going to have enough time to edit the entire video and get that out to you on time. So look for that in a future video. In probably one of my vlogs, I will like do a little update of me adding the backing to this. I think what I want is to have some like furry backing that's like all white so that we can hide all of there are just like some ugly backs of some of these granny squares, but for right now it is super cozy and warm, and it's gonna replace the throw blanket that I have in here currently. You guys have probably seen it before if you've watched a lot of my videos. It's like a red and black checkered blanket, and it's really soft and nice, but I think this will look nicer in my lap when I'm like doing crochet with me type content where I'm filming me crocheting and you see like the blanket in my lap or whatever. So this will be more on theme for this entire room with how colorful it is, as well as just like everything I make on a daily basis. So yeah, I'm really excited that this is finished. Overall, the Granny Square card deck is a very nice resource to have if you're looking for different types of granny squares and you don't want to like scour the internet for different free patterns. These aren't free patterns, it's like a paid deck, but there's 50 patterns in the deck. It's also available on Amazon. If you don't have a Barnes & Noble near you, you can always order it off Amazon, and I put the link in the description for you. So that is easy access to you, but it is a nice card deck. I'm excited for her next one to come out this summer. I don't know exactly what month, but like I was saying at the beginning of the video, she's coming out with another Granny Square card deck, and it's all going to be flower patterns, so that'll be really cool when it comes out. I'm really excited for that. I will probably do a video on that as well, just so that I have another nice Granny Square blanket lying around that I can use as inspiration, especially if I'm thinking of gifts for people. Something I actually wanted to do this year for Christmas was I want to make every one of my family members, or like each family in the family members, like each couple, their own blanket with this chenille yarn that's really nice and soft. And this will serve as really great inspiration for picking different squares that will look good together, as well as just like thinking of different patterns and stuff. I really like having some of these solid squares in here to break up the more intricate patterns that are featured on this blanket. I also really love the 3D element of this flower on here. So potentially a blanket full of like 3D flowers, or like a flower devoted blanket where we just have a bunch of different kinds of granny square flowers. So yeah, I'm really excited that I got this video done for you guys, and I hope you guys enjoy it. If you think you're gonna try out the Granny Square card deck, let me know in the comment section below, or if you have already, it's been out for probably a really long time. I don't know when it came out, but I know that it's fairly new, but it's not like brand new by any sense. It didn't come out this year, at least I know for a fact. But yeah, if you've tried it before, let me know in the comment section. If you have a favorite pattern from the card deck, or if there are specific patterns that you just like really don't like, let me know as well. I am always fascinated with y'all's opinions on different things and whether they align with my opinions. That's also always really fascinating to me. So yeah, let me know. Give me some feedback in the comment section if you have any thoughts about this blanket or the patterns in this Granny Square deck. And with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit that like button. That lets me know that you liked the video and you want to see more like this in the future from me. And I hope to see you guys again next week in my next video. So I'll see you guys later. Bye.